Dr. Taraba and I, along with a couple of other of our colleagues in ag engineering and animal sciences, have had a lot of fun going out and learning about these systems and learning about what can and can't work and how we should manage these systems. And one of the first things that we did when we set out to try to do research was we wanted to see what the farmers were actually doing and learn from what they had to tell us, because the farmers figured out most of what we know now. We've just compiled that. Now, I think we've been able to put some science to that, put some numbers to it, and improve some things and come up with a better set of recommendations. But a lot of this stems from what we learned from the farmers that were making it work. So I'm going to talk to you today a lot about the cow parts and the management aspects of managing the compost bedded pack barn. And Joe talked about a lot about this system. I'm going to kind of skip some of those points, but one of the things I'd like to say, I grew up on a dairy farm in Kentucky, and we didn't have any housing. So we were that traditional Kentucky farm where we put the cows on pasture, not because we were grazing them, just because they needed some place to stay. And we did, in the wintertime, which isn't as long where we were as it is here, have the cows in a traditional bedded pack. And I think that's really important to make the distinction between my grandfather's bedded pack to the compost bedded pack. It is an intensively managed process. It's not just putting bedding in and continually adding more bedding on top. That was the image that I had in my mind when my advisor told me to talk about compost bedded pack barns. And it wasn't a very positive image. I wanted the weather to get warmer so we could put the cows back outside, because that wasn't a great environment for cows. The ammonia levels run so high. We end up growing a lot of environmental mastitis bacteria. It's not the best environment for animals. This is a different system, and we're really relying on the composting process itself to dry the bedding, to provide that cow with a drier surface to rest on. This was one of our interesting little side studies, I guess you could say, that we did. We have these monitors that measure line behavior. It uses an accelerometer, which is the same technology that's in your iPhones or smartphones, that when it changes the orientation, it changes the orientation of the screen. We took these tags and put them onto a herd that was moving from an old freestyle barn. This is not a nice modern freestyle barn. I still like freestyle barns, okay? I've just done more with compost barns. This was an old freestyle barn, and they moved into a compost barn. These are the same cows. The average hours line increased by almost 4 hours a day. That tells us something about the comfort level in this barn. I'm not going to suggest that this is the results that we would see if we had a nice sand freestyle barn with modern dimensions and so forth. I don't think we would get this kind of results. But the cows are telling us something about the system when we see that kind of response. Perception I had early, the cows are going to be filthy. Start going out there, seeing these farms, the ones that are well managed, we don't see filthy cows. These cows are really, really clean. This is why we can see this system working. When we talk about pack management, we're usually talking about adding up to 2 feet of bedding in the beginning. That's a lot of bedding, and that's one of the challenges for people a lot of times, and one of the areas where people fail getting a barn started is you put all this capital into putting the structure together, and that extra $1,000 for another load seems like something to skip. But you need a lot of bedding to get it started. New bedding is added when the pack starts looking moist. You'll see still some publications out and still hear people say that you add bedding when the bedding starts sticking to the cows. And one of the things that we found in talking to our farmers that had it working was, if you wait till it sticks to the cows, it's too late. You need to get it added sooner than that. New bedding is added every 1 to 8 weeks. Nice big wide range, right? That's a great extension recommendation. Add it 1 to 8 weeks. Well, it's going to vary. It's going to vary a lot. In the summertime, it may be 2-3 months between times when you have to add new bedding. In the wintertime, it may be once a week. At times it may even be twice a week. So it's going to vary a lot depending on the weather conditions. Packs are typically cleaned out 1 to 2 times a year. We've actually seen some farms go as long as 3 years without cleaning out the bedding because it's composted that well. 3 years between cleanouts. We do recommend, as Dr. Taraba mentioned, leaving some of the old material to get the pack started. Pack is typically aerated when the cows are out of the barn during milking. We really recommend that they start that bedding, not leave it sit there. Go ahead and stir that in. Need to aerate at least 10 to 12 inches deep. It helps if we're stirring both lengthwise and crosswise across the barn, and there's multiple ways of doing that. But one of the things that we've learned is to be careful with compaction. You don't want to go in there and use a really large tractor to stir that, or you'll end up creating more compaction and reduce the aeration. These are the things that we think are the keys to managing the compost bedded pack barn, to get that effective composting. How we design the facility is really critical, making sure that we have adequate ventilation, take advantage of natural ventilation, supplement that with mechanical ventilation. Stocking density is huge. We can't stock that barn. The single biggest reason for compost bedded pack barn failure is overstocking. And the frequent stirrings really became clear as we went across the state visiting those 60 farms that the ones that were stirring twice a day were the ones that were working, and anybody that said once a day or most of the time twice a day didn't work so well. These are the things that we've seen. I spend a lot of time and I get a lot of calls when it doesn't work, when the system's broken. It is broken sometimes, okay? And I think that's one of the things that we need to not gloss over, that sometimes the compost barn doesn't work the way the book says it should, or we might say it should sometimes. We do see these situations. You can see here a dirty cow. We're in Joe Hogan territory, right? This is Joe Hogan's picture of what he would use for a compost bedded pack barn system. Joe Hogan is not a big fan of this system because he sees these cows. We don't see a lot of these cows, but we do see them. When I talk about dairy facilities, I always say that every dairy facility choice for a farmer is about deciding which management practices you want to implement. The freestall barn can work great, the compost barn can work great, the tie stall barn can work great, but not for everybody. Everybody has to pick out which system works for what you want to do. And just like every compost barn has to be managed well, so does every freestall barn, so does every tie stall barn. We can mismanage these, just like we can mismanage a freestall barn. The biggest things we see for why these packs don't work, first of all, barn design flaws. We see barns that aren't very well ventilated, not big enough, some layout features that are problems, stocking density, just too many cows. There's always that temptation to put one more cow in. And then the other thing that we've seen with stocking density is we have farms that say, I'm going to use freestall barn for most of my cows and the compost barn for special needs cows. But then when they see how well those special needs cows respond, let's just put a few more in there. There's another lame cow. There's another cow that isn't using the stalls. And suddenly that barn is overstocked, and then it's not doing what it was supposed to do. So stocking density is really critical. The material that's used, we have seen the most success with sawdust. Joe and I have had lots of debates about straw. It should work. I've never seen it work yet. So I know it should work. The barns that we've had use it have had really bad problems. Most of it, I think, is because the particle length that they put it in is too long. If we were able to chop it, and I know there have been people in other states that have used it successfully, if they're able to chop it, it may work better, but it hasn't worked very well from a practical perspective. We've also had one facility that tried to use cedar, smelled great, big nasty mess. Cedar, because of its antimicrobial properties, is not really the material that you want to use. Not stirring frequently enough, not stirring deep enough, not stirring well enough, all those are problems. Compaction from tractors. Starting the pack in the wintertime is a major issue. If you try to start this in the wintertime, it's just too much of a temperature gradient to make that pack work. We would really recommend that you get it started before Halloween in our climate. Trying to start it in November, December. We've seen over and over again people start these barns in November and December, and it's just a wait till the spring until it works. It seems to really struggle getting started in the wintertime, but if it's going into the wintertime, it seems to be able to maintain itself. And then curtains, I think, are certainly something that we would recommend in the wintertime. Certainly here, you guys probably need it more than what we do. But back in that year when we did those studies, it was one week in January, we all went out and we just laughed. It was so cold, and we just laughed. We said, there's no way we're going to see a barn that's working this week. And we went to these 3 farms. Bam, bam, bam. Every one of them working beautifully, very cold, 100, 110, 130 temperatures in the compost, successfully working. They all had curtains. That cold wind coming across that pack just takes that heat and sucks it right out of there. That's my non-engineering way of describing that. So forgive me, I'm a cow guy, not an engineer. So we want to see that temperature 110 to 150 degrees, moisture 45 to 55%. The fluffiness, this is a cow guy term, okay? Fluffiness, but we want to see that air in there, that we've got some give as we go into the pack. How well the cows are distributed within the barn. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people start thinking about measuring how well it's working based on dirty cows, or worse, based on the somatic cell count or clinical mastitis. And we want to catch it earlier than that. So we need to be looking at these other things before we get to dirty cows and before we get to increased cell counts and clinical mastitis. So I want to describe kind of some of the things that we learned from our study. There was 5 of us working on this, Dr. Tarab, myself, my graduate student, Randy Black, Flavio Damasceno from Brazil was an engineer, and George Day, also an engineer, that worked on this project. So we visited quite a few different barns. We took composite samples around the barn, and we asked a lot of questions of the producers, and also looked at their DHI and cell count data. One of the things we asked them is, why do you think this system works? And this is a list, and a lot of this is the same things that Dr. Taraba talked about, but improved cow comfort, improved cow cleanliness. They like the fact that it's kind of a low maintenance system, this idea of using it for special needs cows, the idea that the cow can rest in a natural position, that she doesn't have to, we're not restricting her to a stall where she has to lay like this. We see these cows laid out like that cow that Dr. Taraba talked about, and how they sleep and rest is different in this kind of facility. Feet and leg health, wow, what a difference these barns have in terms of feet and leg health by not spending as much time on concrete. Certainly a lot of these farms had moved from pasture, so that changed some things, how close they were to the parlor, lower cell counts, increased heat detection. Cows show heat better in these facilities, being able to handle manure easily. Some of these farms said the biggest advantage was because we've got increased dry matter intake because they were on pasture, remember, so now they've gone to a situation where the cows are just closer to their feed. Production, longevity, fewer leg and teat injuries, and less time on concrete. I think the teat injuries one is an interesting one that we got a lot of questions about earlier on. Won't these cows step on each other? Won't they step on each other's teats? Never had a farmer mention this as a problem. I think it's important to remember most cows, when we have stepped on teats, they've stepped on their own teat. It's not that another cow has stepped on her teats. But it really hasn't been a problem with these compost barns. So this is some somatic cell count data from these farms. This is using their bulk tank averages. We divided these herds either as the ones that were using the compost barn as their primary housing compared to those that were using it just for special needs. We saw about a 75,000 drop in cell count for the farms once they moved into the compost barn. And then for the special needs cows, no real difference there between those, because a lot of those cows were still in the other facility. Now, I'm not up here going to tell you that if you move into a compost barn, you will see a 75,000 drop in cell count. I think if we took the same kind of a study and we took farms that moved into a new freestall barn, we'd see similar results. I think a lot of this is just moving into an improved cow comfort and so forth. So I don't think that the take-home message from this should be, move into a compost barn, you're going to get a lower cell count. I think the take-home message from this is, you can. There's that perception out there that you can't get good milk quality in a compost-bedded pack barn, and we certainly see that you can. Now, these numbers are higher than yours. You got to remember, we're in Kentucky, where our average cell count is 313,000. So these are better than the state averages. We have seen farms actually move from sand-free stalls to compost barns and see a reduction in cell count. I was worried. One barn we worked with, sand-free stall, good cow comfort, always set between 250 and 300,000 cell count. I told him, don't expect the cell count drop. Please don't going throwing things at me when you think that you're going to get a drop, because you're not going to get a drop. I was wrong. He dropped to consistently between 75 and 150 now. So moving into the compost barn, he's still done that. Excellent manager, right? You have to do that no matter what, 75,000. You're not missing many things there, but we can really do well with milk quality in these compost barns. This just kind of shows that again. This was some data that Randy put together looking at what happened to milk production. Sorry, these are in kilograms, but milk production increased both in terms of daily milk production and rolling herd average, and then cell count decreased considerably again for these cows, these herds moving into the compost barn. Culling rates change. If you look at this, what's happened here is these herds reduced the number of cows that they were culling for feet and leg problems and reproduction problems, and increased the number of cows that they were culling for production and for dairy reasons, meaning selling them to another farm. So that's the kind of culls we want, right? We want to be able to sell them because that cow's not performing well. We want to be able to do that instead of reproductive problems or feet and leg problems. So that's another positive coming out of that. It's interesting to me when we start looking at some of this other data that we have here a graph that shows that even in a compost barn where we don't have cows in the alleys all that much just while they're eating, scraping twice a day increased cow cleanliness. So we really recommend still cleaning the feed alleys twice a day. The hygiene of the cows really depends on management. We want to see these clean cows. We don't want to see them dirty like this, and it all comes down to how that facility is managed. We did a lot of hygiene scoring. So Randy scored about 2,500 cows. Basically, cleaner cows are 1s, dirtier cows are 4. She scored at least 50 cows per barn, and we randomly selected cows based on the number of their ear tag. And some of the interesting things that we saw here, this graph right here shows that as the outside temperature increased, the cows were cleaner. This makes sense, right? It's easier to keep the compost working in the summertime. As the packed moisture increased, the cows got dirtier. Okay? Wet barns, dirty cows. And as the packed temperature increased, the cows were cleaner. So we want to keep that temperature high, moisture low to keep the cows clean. We also looked at a lot of bacteria. Okay? This was interesting. So you've probably heard some people say, if you move the cows into the compost barn, you'll get improved somatic cell count because we kill the bacteria. The compost process kills the bacteria. Nope, that doesn't happen. In fact, we grow them really well. The optimal environment for composting is also the optimal environment for growing most of the bacteria that cause mastitis. Now this is where me as an animal scientist, where I start scratching my head a little bit, because this doesn't match what I just told you a minute ago, does it? That we have improved milk quality, but we have high levels of bacteria in the bedding. I won't go into this in great detail, but basically the environmental streps seem to respond better to temperature than some of the other bacteria. We don't know what all this means yet. We know what we see from a practical perspective. We don't know how that ties into the biology yet, and we're trying to learn more about that. But no doubt the bacterial load is going to be high in the compost-bedded pack barns. Coliform bacteria, environmental staph bacteria seem to thrive in those optimal compost conditions. Strep species may be more susceptible to the heat. It may be just partly the competition of bugs within the bedding, and certainly in the hot temperatures, that's when we're going to get the most bacteria. We really want to focus then on the idea what makes the compost work is keeping it dry. Not that we're killing bacteria, but that we have a dry surface for those cows to lay on, and that we don't have a lot of bedding and other material, like manure, sticking to the ends of the cow's teats. So why do we see this improvements in somatic cell count? We're trying to figure out more of this. We know part of it's because of the dryness. There probably are some immune function things there. Perhaps it's because of improved cow comfort, better feet and legs, all those sort of things, that when the cows do get a bacterial challenge, they're just able to handle it better because they do feel better. A lot of that's what we see with sand, right? We give sand a lot of credit because it's inorganic and bacteria doesn't grow all that well in it. But bacteria does grow in sand once you add manure to it, particularly. So we do have this cow comfort thing that we talk about, but probably don't have as good an understanding of as what we really like to have. We do need to follow up with clinical mastitis. We don't know really quantitatively what the clinical mastitis is, but we're getting ready to do a study looking at clinical mastitis in compost barn. Clinical mastitis and somatic cell count are always that related. You guys know that if you're milking cows. Couple things, other things that we saw. First of all, we recommend a stocking density over 100 square feet per cow. Most of the farms did not have that. We recommend, this is the same thing, one is just adjusted for milk production. Water space and feed space. In the study that we did, most farms lacked in water space, did not have enough water space. Probably would do the same kind of study in freestall barn, we'd find that. But really a challenge making sure those animals have enough water space in the compost barn, and we want to make sure that those animals do have quick, easy access to a lot of water. We know the importance of water in managing cows for production. One of the questions we asked our producers was, if you could do it over again, what would you do differently? What would you do differently if you were building the same barn again? Most of them said, I'd build it bigger. I figured out that I was going to put more cows in there. So make the barns bigger than what you think initially. They wanted larger ridge vents to improve natural ventilation. Higher sidewalls, again, improve natural ventilation. They didn't like the idea of putting posts in the pack. We say still, and probably not as much as we did at first, that you should always build the barn with the flexibility to go in and put stalls in later. That's great in theory, but in practice, it makes it a lot harder to stir the pack. Also, if you start running the numbers on that, it doesn't work quite as well as you'd like for it to. Some of them said that didn't put a retaining wall in, said that you should add a retaining wall. Some of them said, I want more waters, or just the location of the waters. Big problem, putting the water in the pack. We don't want the cows ever to access the water from the pack. Adding curtains, changing the size or location of the feed bunk, needing to put more fans in, and more overhang. These are the things that the farmers said they would do differently for their facilities. So from here, after visiting all these farms, how did this change our recommendations for what we'd like to see for Kentucky compost bedded back barns? Well, one of the things that came out really clear was we wanted to see curtains in the wintertime. Another one was we really felt like the east-west orientation was advantageous. That would be a general recommendation for the most part, at least in our part of the world, for building orientation. Sometimes in the Kentucky hills, not always possible because you have to go with the lay of the land. But east-west is probably better for two reasons. Well, we know we get more south winds and we get better natural ventilation. The other thing that we need to think about when we're orienting a compost barn is sunlight. And with an east-west orientation, you have less time when the sun is really focused in on those animals. Because what you'll see, these cows really tell you exactly what's going on in the barn. They'll bunch. They don't want to lay right in the sand, right in the sun. So they'll move with the sun. And then if you get too much moisture in one area, not enough in another, you have problems. So the sunlight is really critical there. They wanted to have a ridge vent with a cap. We want to see a focus not on building the barns for the number of cows that you have on average through the year, but then build it for the number of cows that you have milking in the wintertime. A lot of people have more cows milking in the wintertime, and that's the time when you really have the chance of struggling the most. So build it for the number of cows that you anticipate to be milking in the wintertime. Milk production is important. Higher milk production cows consume more feed, produce more manure and urine. So if we have a higher production herd, we probably need more space. Cow size is also important. Larger animals, more manure, more urine. We think multiple entrances to the barn are beneficial. We'd like to see multiple entrances on the long side of the barn rather than just one entrance on the short end of the barn. We really want people to focus more on feed space and water space. I think a lot of these barns, at least some of the early ones that we saw, really shorted cows on feed space and water space, and we see some production losses there by not getting those things in. we want farmers to be careful in thinking about fan sizing and fan placement. I hope that some of you engineers talk a little bit more about this later. But one of the challenges that we have here is a lot of our thought process on fans and fan placement is based on freestalls. And in a freestall barn, we don't care if we miss the alleys. We just want air down the freestalls and the feed alley. And we've got these spaces we don't have to worry as much about airflow. In the compost barn, it's the whole thing. So we've got more area that we need to be cooling and more area that we need to have fans. And we'll see this. I've seen rows of fans where you see a fan and a row of cows, a big blank spot, a fan, a row of cows, a big blank spot, and the cows tell you exactly where you're missing fans. And I've seen with the HVLS fans, the big ass fans, big fan, circle of cows. Needed another fan here, no cows. Big fan, circle of cows. They will tell you when you don't have enough fans. And that creates a big problem because we get wet areas. And we've got to think more about this fan placement within the compost barn. I think we need to think about managing the compost barn as a different system in the summertime than in the wintertime. You have to really, really try to screw this up in the summertime. It'll work beautifully in the summertime. In the wintertime, you've really got to work at it. It's two different management strategies to make the compost barn work. The packs have to be stirred twice a day, every day, no exceptions. One of the best farms we worked with, we tried hard over and over. We said, "You're not stirring it twice a day." "Yes, we are." "I don't think you're stirring it twice a day." "Yeah, we are." Well, one day we were there at 9 o'clock at night, and we saw it never got stirred. And so I said, "Glenn, I don't think you stirred this pack." "Okay, I didn't. I really don't stir it every time." And it took 5 different times, 5 different conversations, and finally they said, maybe there's something to this. Maybe our 450,000 somatic cell count's a problem. They started stirring it twice a day. That cell count graph goes just like that. Once they started stirring it, it worked. That was the only thing they changed. Stir the pack when the bedding is added. Don't skip stirring that. You want to stir those piles under. You want to get that new bedding incorporated. Waiting until the bedding sticks to the cows, as I mentioned earlier, is too late. As an animal scientist, somebody that spends a lot of my time focused on milk quality, I really want to see everybody with a compost bedded pack barn using a coliform mastitis vaccine. J5, JVac, Indavac, Bovi, I don't care. They all work well. But a coliform mastitis vaccine is a good insurance policy in a compost-bedded pack barn. And as Dr. Taraba mentioned, really the ideal thing would probably be if we could go back and forth between rototillers and cultivators. We have had people do that with a lot of success. Obviously, management-wise, big problem trying to get change of implements all the time. But that would probably be the ideal thing, or if we could come up with something that would allow us to get the deep till and the effective stirring simultaneously.